I never thought scrolling through social media would destroy my life, but there it was. My sister Vivian's post with 8,000 likes. Finally blocking my sister. Family is better without her. The comments were brutal. Strangers celebrating my exile, calling me toxic, manipulative. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the trust fund she'd been stealing from for 3 years, or how she'd convinced our dying grandmother to change her will. As I screenshotted the evidence I'd been gathering, my phone buzzed. Mom was calling. Hey everyone. Before we dive into this family nightmare, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. If you've ever dealt with family betrayal, hit that like button because this story gets absolutely wild. Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss how this sister gets exactly what she deserves. Trust me, the justice served in this story will leave you speechless. The phone call with Mom lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Long enough for her to tell me I was no longer welcome at Christmas, Easter, or any family gathering until I got my act together and stopped being jealous of Vivian's success. Short enough that she hung up before I could defend myself. I sat in my tiny apartment staring at that post. 8,000 likes had become 12,000. The comments kept flowing. Good for you, family. Toxicity is real. Blood doesn't mean you have to tolerate abuse. Protect your peace, queen. If only they knew. My name is Scarlett Walsh, and 6 months ago I discovered my golden child sister had been systematically stealing from our family's trust fund. Money that was supposed to support our ailing grandmother's medical care and eventually provide for both of us after college. But Vivian had other plans. It started innocently enough. I'd been helping Grandma Rose with her finances since her arthritis made writing checks difficult. Rose had always been sharp as a tack, but at 87, managing complex financial documents was becoming overwhelming. I'd drive over every Tuesday to help her sort through bills, insurance claims, and bank statements. That's when I noticed the discrepancies. The trust fund established by our late grandfather was supposed to have roughly $200,000. The statements showed regular withdrawals, some legitimate for Grandma's care, others labeled vaguely as family assistance or educational support. But when I cross-referenced these with what Grandma actually received, the numbers didn't add up. Vivian had power of attorney. She'd convinced our parents this was necessary when Grandma had a minor stroke 2 years ago. Scarlett's too busy with her struggling art career, she'd said. I have the business degree. I understand finance. The first suspicious transaction was for $8,000 labeled emergency medical. Scarlett. I'd never received emergency medical care that cost $8,000. In fact, I hadn't even been to a hospital in years. I dug deeper. Over 3 years, Vivian had stolen nearly $60,000. She'd created fake medical bills in my name, forged receipts for educational expenses I'd never incurred, and even submitted false invoices for home repairs that never happened. The money had funded her lifestyle. Designer clothes, a new car, that expensive apartment downtown that she claimed her marketing job could afford. But the real kicker, I found emails between Vivian and a lawyer discussing Grandma's will. Vivian had convinced our dying grandmother that I was financially irresponsible, that I'd waste any inheritance on my silly art projects. The new will left everything to Vivian with a mere $5,000 for me. Enough to get her started on a real career path. Our grandmother was being manipulated by the very person she'd trusted to care for her. I tried talking to Vivian first. I called her on a Thursday evening, my hands shaking as I held the printed bank statements. Hey Viv, we need to talk about Grandma's trust fund. What about it? Her voice was casual, distracted. I could hear her clicking through something on her computer. There are some discrepancies in the withdrawals. Some transactions don't match what Grandma received. The clicking stopped. Scarlett, you're not authorized to review those documents. I have power of attorney for a reason. But the medical bill for $8,000 in my name was a mistake that got corrected. You're overthinking this. Vivian, I never had any medical expenses that... Look, I don't have time for this conspiracy theory nonsense. Grandma's care is expensive and you clearly don't understand how trust funds work. Maybe focus on your art instead of playing detective. She hung up. That weekend I drove to Grandma's house with copies of everything. Rose was in her garden tending to the tomatoes that had been her pride for decades. When I showed her the documents, her face went pale. "Honey, I never authorized most of these withdrawals," she whispered, adjusting her glasses to read the statements more carefully. "And this medical bill in your name. I remember asking Vivian about it, and she said you were embarrassed about asking for help directly." My heart broke seeing the confusion and hurt in her eyes. "Grandma, I need you to know. I never received this money, and I would never be embarrassed to ask you for help if I needed it." Rose sat heavily in her kitchen chair, the weight of betrayal settling on her shoulders. "That girl convinced me you were struggling financially, that you were too proud to accept family help. She said the trust fund payments were going to cover your debts so you could focus on your art without stress." We spent 3 hours going through every transaction. Rose had been told elaborate stories about my supposed financial crises, my medical emergencies, my educational expenses. Vivian had created an entire fictional version of my life to justify the theft. "She also suggested changes to my will," Rose said quietly. "Said you'd mentioned wanting me to leave most everything to her since you didn't believe in traditional wealth and preferred to make your own way." I'd never said any such thing. But here's where it gets worse. When I tried to discuss this with our parents, Vivian had already gotten to them. She'd spun a story about my jealousy over her successful career, my resentment about her being trusted with family responsibilities, and my desperate attempts to cause drama because I couldn't handle her achievements. By the time I presented the evidence, they'd already been primed to see me as the problem. "Scarlett, this is exactly the kind of behavior Vivian warned us about," Dad said, barely glancing at the documents. "You've always been jealous of your sister's success, and now you're creating elaborate conspiracies to tear her down. These are bank statements, Dad. Official documents showing that you don't understand how complex financial management works," Mom interrupted. "Vivian has been nothing but generous, helping with Grandma's care while you've been focused on your hobbies." Hobbies. They called my art career hobbies. That's when Vivian made her power move. She convinced our parents that I was becoming unstable and obsessed with destroying her reputation. She suggested they needed to protect the family from my toxic behavior. 2 weeks later, that social media post went live. The screenshot of Vivian's post had been shared in 3 different Facebook groups dedicated to cutting off toxic family members. Her story was simple and compelling. She had a sister who couldn't handle her success, who created drama at every family gathering, who had become increasingly paranoid and accusatory. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. "You're so brave for prioritizing your mental health. Family doesn't give you the right to be abusive. Sometimes the trash takes itself out." But Vivian made one crucial mistake. In her rush to paint me as the villain, she'd gotten specific. Too specific. In the comments of her post, she'd written detailed responses about my supposed behavior. She claimed I'd stolen money from Grandma, that I'd forged documents to make her look bad, that I'd even faked medical emergencies for attention. She described incidents that never happened with perfect clarity, painting herself as the long-suffering saint who'd finally reached her breaking point. Reading those comments, I realized Vivian had just handed me the evidence I needed. She'd documented her lies in writing in a public forum with timestamps. More importantly, she'd accused me of the exact crimes she'd committed, a classic projection that any lawyer would recognize immediately. I spent the next week building my case methodically. First, I gathered every piece of financial documentation: bank statements, fake invoices, forged receipts, email trails. Then I requested my complete medical records going back 5 years, proving I'd never had the emergency treatments Vivian claimed to have paid for. But I needed more than documents. I needed witnesses. I started with Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor who'd known our family for 20 years. She'd often seen me helping Grandma with yard work and grocery shopping, while Vivian rarely visited except for brief business-like meetings. That girl always seemed in such a hurry when she came by. Mrs. Patterson told me over coffee, "Never stayed to chat with Rose like you do." And I remember thinking it was odd when she started coming by with papers for your grandmother to sign. Rose mentioned feeling pressured, like she didn't fully understand what she was agreeing to. Next, I contacted Dr. Martinez, Grandma's primary physician. While he couldn't share specific details due to privacy laws, he confirmed that Rose's actual medical expenses were far lower than what appeared on the trust fund withdrawals. He also mentioned that Rose had seemed confused during recent visits about her financial situation. She kept asking if her granddaughter Scarlett was okay because someone had told her you were having serious health problems. When I assured her you seemed fine during your visits with her, she looked very relieved, but also troubled. The breakthrough came when I reached out to Jake Morrison, a mutual friend who worked at the bank where the trust fund was held. Jake couldn't access account details, but he could confirm general policies about power of attorney and suspicious transaction patterns. If someone's making regular withdrawals that don't match the stated purpose, especially using another person's name for fictitious expenses, that's textbook financial abuse, he explained. Banks have fraud detection systems, but they rely on the account holders or authorized parties to report suspicious activity. Armed with this information, I made an appointment with the bank's fraud investigation department. I brought every document, every receipt, every piece of evidence I'd collected. The investigator, Ms. Rodriguez, reviewed everything with professional thoroughness. "This is a clear case of financial abuse and potentially elder fraud," she concluded. "The pattern of false documentation, the forged receipts, the withdrawals that don't match their stated purpose. We'll need to freeze this account immediately and begin a formal investigation." Within 48 hours, Vivian's access to Grandma's trust fund was suspended. But I wasn't done. I printed every comment from Vivian's social media post, every response where she detailed her fictional version of events. I compiled them into a comprehensive document alongside the bank records, medical records, and witness statements. Then I did something Vivian never expected. I created my own social media post. My sister posted that she's blocking me because family is better without me. She's told everyone I'm toxic, jealous, and unstable. She's convinced our parents that I'm the problem. But here's what she didn't mention: the $60,000 she's stolen from our grandmother's trust fund over 3 years. I attached the bank statements, the forged receipts, the fake medical bills. Everything was public record now, since the bank had flagged it as fraud. The response was immediate and explosive. Vivian's original post had gotten 12,000 likes. Mine got 50,000 in the first day. The comments were brutal, but this time they were aimed at the right target. This is exactly why power of attorney abuse is such a huge problem. That poor grandmother. How could someone steal from their own family like this? Screenshot this before she tries to delete everything. Financial elder abuse is a crime. Has anyone reported this to authorities? But the real victory came when people started recognizing Vivian's name and cross-referencing her original post with my evidence. Someone had screenshotted her entire comment thread before she could delete it, and the contradictions were glaring. In her post, she'd accused me of stealing from Grandma. In my post, I'd provided bank records proving she was the one stealing. In her comments, she'd described my supposed fake medical emergencies. In my evidence, I'd shown those exact fake medical bills she'd created in my name. The internet does not forgive financial elder abuse. Within hours, Vivian's employer was tagged in the comments. Her professional social media profiles were flooded with people sharing the evidence. Local news outlets started picking up the story after it went viral. She tried damage control, posting a frantic response claiming I'd doctored the bank documents and was having a mental breakdown. But it was too late. The bank had already confirmed the fraud investigation, and public records don't lie. The best part: our parents couldn't ignore it anymore. When 50,000 strangers are calling your daughter a criminal based on official bank documents, denial becomes impossible. Dad called me on Sunday morning, his voice shaky with a combination of anger and shame. "Scarlett, we need to talk. Your mother and I. We've seen the post. We've looked at the documents. We think we may have been misled about the situation." Misled. That was one way to put it. "We'd like you to come over so we can discuss this as a family, without Vivian present initially." The tide was turning, but I knew this was just the beginning. Vivian wouldn't go down without a fight, and she still had tricks I hadn't anticipated. Sunday dinner at my parents' house felt like stepping into a parallel universe. For the first time in months, I was sitting at the kitchen table without being treated like a convicted felon. Mom had made my favorite lasagna, not Vivian's preferred salmon, and Dad actually looked me in the eye when he spoke. "We owe you an apology." Mom began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We should have listened when you tried to show us those documents. We trusted Vivian's version of events because—" Dad paused, running his hand through his graying hair. "Because it was easier than believing one of our daughters could do something so calculating." I appreciated their apology, but I wasn't ready to let them off the hook completely. "She didn't just steal money," I said, pulling out my phone to show them the screenshots I'd saved. "She created an entire fictional narrative about my life to justify it. Look at what she told Grandma about me." I showed them the emails I'd found on Rose's computer. Messages from Vivian describing my supposed financial irresponsibility, my alleged drug problems, my fictional gambling debts. Stories so detailed and convincing that our grandmother had started setting aside money she couldn't afford to help me with problems that didn't exist. She convinced Grandma I was ashamed to ask for help directly. I continued. So when Rose asked about me, Vivian would say I was too proud to admit I needed family support. Grandma was suffering thinking her granddaughter was in crisis and too stubborn to accept help. Mom started crying. Dad just sat there staring at the evidence of manipulation that ran so much deeper than simple theft. But our family meeting was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. The doorbell rang, and Dad returned with Tom Bradley, our family's longtime accountant. Tom had been managing our family's taxes and financial planning for over 15 years. He looked serious and uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to interrupt your Sunday, but I needed to speak with you all urgently," Tom said, setting his briefcase on the kitchen counter. "I've been reviewing some irregularities in your family's financial accounts, and I think you need to see this." Tom opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Vivian contacted me 3 months ago, asking me to help restructure some family investments. She said she had power of attorney over Rose's affairs and wanted to optimize the portfolio for tax purposes. She also mentioned that Scarlett had given her permission to act on her behalf for certain financial matters. I'd never given Vivian permission to do anything on my behalf. She presented me with what appeared to be legitimate documentation." Tom continued, spreading papers across the table. "Power of attorney papers, signed authorizations, investment transfer forms. But after seeing the news coverage and the bank's fraud investigation, I've discovered that several of these documents appear to be falsified." The scope of Vivian's deception was expanding before our eyes. Tom showed us forged signatures, my signature on documents I'd never seen authorizing transfers I'd never approved. Vivian had been systematically repositioning family assets, not just stealing from Grandma's trust fund, but manipulating multiple accounts. "She's been siphoning money from your parents' retirement account as well," Tom said, looking directly at Mom and Dad. "Small amounts disguised as fee adjustments and investment rebalancing. Over 2 years, approximately $28,000 has been redirected to accounts she controls." Dad's face went white. $28,000. She presented documentation suggesting these were authorized family loans to help with Scarlett's education expenses and medical bills. The amounts were small enough not to trigger immediate attention, but they've been consistent and systematic. My parents had been victims too. Tom's revelation changed everything. This wasn't just about Grandma's money anymore. Vivian had been stealing from our entire family while painting me as the financial burden who needed constant bailouts. There's more, Tom said reluctantly. She's applied for several credit cards using family information as collateral. Rose's address, your parents' employment information, even some of Scarlett's personal details. If the bank investigation expands, you may discover additional fraudulent accounts. We sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of Vivian's betrayal. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Marcus Reed, investigative journalist with Channel 7 News. I saw your viral post about financial elder abuse. Would you be interested in discussing your story for our consumer protection segment? This type of family fraud is more common than people realize, and your documentation could help other victims. I showed the text to my parents. Dad immediately shook his head. Scarlett, this is family business. We don't need to make this more public than it already is. But I was thinking bigger picture. What if going public prevents this from happening to other families? What if there are other victims out there who don't realize what's happening to them? Mom looked uncertain, but Tom nodded thoughtfully. Actually, publicizing this case might be beneficial, he said. Financial elder abuse often goes undetected because family members trust each other implicitly. Your story could help other families recognize the warning signs. Over the next hour, we developed a strategy. Tom would continue auditing all family accounts to determine the full extent of the fraud. My parents would contact their bank to review all transactions from the past 3 years. I would coordinate with the journalists and investigators who were now reaching out. But we needed more help. That's when Mom suggested contacting Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, who lived across the country. Linda was a retired police detective who specialized in financial crimes. More importantly, she'd never liked Vivian. Linda always said there was something off about that girl, Mom admitted. She said Vivian was too charming, too quick to volunteer for positions of trust. I thought she was just being cynical. We called Linda immediately. Her response was swift and decisive. I'm flying out tomorrow, she said without hesitation. This isn't just theft. This is a complex fraud scheme, and she's probably not working alone. Nobody runs this kind of long-term financial manipulation without help or guidance. Linda's expertise proved invaluable. When she arrived Monday evening, she brought investigative skills that none of us possessed. First thing we're doing is pulling credit reports for everyone, she announced, setting up her laptop on our kitchen table like a command center. Vivian's had access to family information for years. We need to know what accounts exist that you don't know about. The credit reports revealed the true scope of the problem. Vivian had opened 12 credit cards using various combinations of family member information. She'd taken out personal loans using Grandma's property as collateral. She'd even established business accounts that listed my parents as co-owners of companies that didn't exist. This girl's been building a house of cards for years, Linda said, reviewing the documents. But she made one crucial mistake. She got greedy and overconfident. When she decided to publicly destroy Scarlett's reputation, she opened herself up to scrutiny she couldn't survive. Linda also discovered something else. Electronic evidence that Vivian hadn't been working alone. Look at these email headers, she said, pointing to her computer screen. Several of the forged documents were created and sent from IP addresses that don't match Vivian's known locations. She's either been using public computers to cover her tracks, or someone else has been helping create these forgeries. We were building a network of evidence and allies, but I had a feeling Vivian was building something too. Tuesday morning, I got a text from my cousin, Jamie, Vivian's closest friend since childhood. We need to meet. There's something you need to know about what Vivian's planning next. Can you meet me at Central Park Cafe at 2 p.m.? Come alone and don't tell anyone you're meeting me. The message felt ominous, but I needed to know what Vivian was planning. I was about to discover that even my growing alliance had been compromised. Looking back now, that moment when everyone started reaching out feels like the calm before the storm. Have you ever felt like you were finally getting support, only to realize some of that help might not be what it seems? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious about your experiences with family drama, because what happened next completely blindsided me. Make sure you're subscribed because this story takes another shocking turn that nobody saw coming. The Central Park Cafe was crowded with the usual Tuesday afternoon mix of tourists and locals. I spotted Jamie immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, nervously stirring her coffee and checking her phone every few seconds. When she saw me approaching, her expression was a mixture of guilt and fear. "Scarlett, thank God you came," she said, gesturing for me to sit quickly. "I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it." I slid into the booth across from her, studying her face. Jamie had always been Vivian's loyal friend, but something was different today. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. "What's going on, Jamie?" She took a shaky breath. "Vivian asked me to spy on you. She's been planning her counterattack since your post went viral, and she needed information about what evidence you had and who was helping you." My blood went cold. "What kind of information?" "Everything. She wanted to know about your meetings with your parents, what the bank investigators were telling you, whether you'd hired lawyers. She even asked me to try to get close to your Aunt Linda to find out what she'd discovered." I stared at her, processing this betrayal. "And did you?" Jamie's eyes filled with tears. I tried to refuse, but Vivian, she has something on me. Something that could destroy my marriage and my career. "What could be that bad?" "Remember when I was going through my divorce 3 years ago, I was desperate for money to pay legal fees, and Vivian offered to lend me $15,000. No questions asked, just help from a friend." I nodded, remembering Jamie's bitter custody battle. "Except it wasn't her money. It was from your grandmother's trust fund, but I didn't know that at the time. Vivian made me sign documents that I thought were just loan agreements, but they were actually receipts showing I'd received money for consulting services I'd never provided." The pieces clicked into place. She made you an unwitting accomplice. Worse than that, she has documentation showing I received stolen money, and she's threatened to turn me in for fraud if I don't help her discredit you. She said she'd tell everyone I was part of the conspiracy from the beginning. Jamie pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages from Vivian. The threats were clear and calculated: cooperate or face criminal charges for participating in elder abuse. But here's the thing, Scarlett. I've been recording our conversations. Every phone call, every meeting where she asked me to spy on you. I have hours of audio of her admitting to the theft, describing how she manipulated the documents, even laughing about how easily she fooled your family. She slid a small recording device across the table. "This is from yesterday. She called to ask what I'd learned about the bank investigation, and she said something that made me realize I couldn't keep helping her." I pressed play on the device. Vivian's voice was clear and unmistakable. "The beauty of this whole situation is that everyone thinks Scarlett's finally getting justice, but they have no idea what's coming. I've been planning for this possibility for months. I have backup documentation that will make her look like the real criminal, and by the time I'm done, she'll be facing charges for fraud, forgery, and defaming me publicly." My hands started shaking as I listened to my sister's voice, cold and calculating, describing her plan to frame me for her crimes. "I've created a paper trail showing that Scarlett had access to the trust fund accounts through Grandma's computer passwords. I have fake emails showing she'd been pressuring Rose to change the will in her favor. I even have forged documents suggesting she'd been stealing money and blaming me to cover her tracks." The recording continued with Vivian outlining her strategy to present me as a manipulative sociopath who'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal from our family while making her look like the villain. "The best part is I've already started planting seeds with the bank investigators. I told them I suspected Scarlett had been manipulating Grandma for months, that I'd been trying to protect Rose from her influence. When they find the evidence I've prepared, they'll realize they've been investigating the wrong person." Jamie stopped the recording. "She's been setting you up from the beginning, Scarlett. Even before your viral post, she was preparing to make you take the fall for everything she's done." I felt sick. "How long do we have before she makes her move?" "She's meeting with investigators tomorrow morning. She's going to present what she calls newly discovered evidence that supposedly proves your guilt." This was worse than simple theft or fraud. Vivian had been running a long-term psychological operation, positioning herself as the concerned sister trying to protect the family from my supposed crimes. But there's more, Jamie continued, looking even more distressed. She's also been feeding information to someone at Channel 7 News, trying to convince them that your story is fabricated. She's claiming you're mentally unstable and that your evidence is falsified. The journalist who'd contacted me about the consumer protection segment, Marcus Reed. If Vivian had gotten to him first, my opportunity to tell the truth publicly could be compromised. Jamie, why are you telling me this now? Why risk crossing her? She wiped her eyes with a napkin. Because yesterday she asked me to do something that made me realize how far she's willing to go. She wanted me to break into your apartment and plant forged documents that would support her version of events. When I refused, she said she'd already found someone else who would do it. Someone else. Vivian had more accomplices than just Jamie. She also mentioned something about your Aunt Linda. She said Linda's investigation was getting too close to certain truths and that she might need to be discredited too. She's been researching Linda's background, looking for anything she can use to undermine her credibility. My aunt, the retired detective who'd been helping us uncover the full scope of the fraud, was now a target. Scarlett, I know I don't deserve your trust after spying on you, but I want to help make this right. I have all the recordings, and I'm willing to testify about everything she asked me to do. I looked at Jamie, trying to determine if this was genuine remorse or another layer of Vivian's manipulation. How do I know this isn't part of her plan? How do I know you're not here to gauge my reaction or feed me false information? Jamie reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. Because I brought copies of everything. The loan documents showing the money came from the trust fund, the text messages, where she threatened me, the recordings of our conversations, and the forged documents she created to frame you. Everything. She slid the envelope across the table. And because I'm going to the police station after this meeting to turn myself in as a witness, I'm done being her victim, and I'm not going to let her destroy you to save herself. As I opened the envelope and reviewed the evidence, I realized Jamie's betrayal might actually be the key to exposing Vivian's entire operation. But I also realized we were running out of time. If Vivian was meeting with investigators tomorrow morning with fabricated evidence designed to frame me, I needed to act fast. The war for the truth was about to begin, and my sister had been planning her final battle for much longer than I'd realized. I called Aunt Linda immediately after leaving the cafe, my hands still shaking from the recordings I'd just heard. When I told her about Vivian's plan to frame me and discredit her investigation, Linda's response was swift and decisive. "We're moving up our timeline," she said. "I've been building a case quietly, but if Vivian's presenting fabricated evidence tomorrow, we need to get ahead of this tonight." Linda had been busy during her week with us. While we'd been focused on the obvious financial fraud, she'd been conducting a deeper investigation that none of us knew about. "Meet me at the precinct in an hour," she instructed, "and bring Jamie with you. If she's willing to cooperate fully, her testimony could be the linchpin we need." The police station felt surreal. 6 months ago, I was a struggling artist whose biggest worry was making rent. Now I was sitting in an interrogation room providing evidence in a complex fraud case involving my own sister. Detective Sarah Chen took our statements with professional thoroughness. She'd been following the case since the bank's fraud investigation began, and Linda had been consulting with her unofficially. "What your aunt discovered goes far beyond simple embezzlement," Detective Chen explained, spreading documents across the table. "We're looking at identity theft, elder abuse, financial fraud, and now potentially obstruction of justice if she's attempting to frame you with falsified evidence." Linda opened her laptop and showed us the results of her investigation. "I've been tracking Vivian's digital footprint for the past week," she said. "The forged documents weren't created on her personal computer. They were made at a professional document service downtown, the same business that specializes in creating fake IDs and fraudulent paperwork." She'd found the smoking gun. The owner of this business, David Martinez, has been cooperating with federal investigators on a separate case involving document fraud. When I showed him photos of the forged signatures and falsified records from your family's case, He immediately recognized the work. Detective Chen leaned forward. Martinez confirmed that Vivian paid for professional document forgery services on multiple occasions over the past 2 years. He has security footage, payment records, and copies of the templates she provided. But the evidence got even more damaging. Martinez also identified Vivian's accomplice, Linda continued. She's been working with Robert Kim, a former bank employee who was terminated for ethics violations 3 years ago. Kim has been helping her understand bank security systems transaction processing and how to avoid triggering fraud detection algorithms. Robert Kim. The pieces were falling into place. Vivian hadn't just been stealing money. She'd been running a sophisticated operation with professional criminals. Kim also provided Vivian with insider information about how fraud investigations work, which explains how she's been able to stay ahead of the bank's inquiries and prepare counter-evidence. Detective Chen added. Jamie's recordings suddenly became even more valuable. In addition to documenting Vivian's confession to the theft, they also captured her mentioning Rob's suggestions for various aspects of the cover-up. But our biggest break came from an unexpected source. Detective Chen's phone buzzed and she stepped away to take the call. When she returned, her expression was grim, but satisfied. That was the fraud investigation unit at your grandmother's bank. They've been monitoring the suspended trust fund account, and guess what? Someone attempted to access it electronically this morning using what appeared to be legitimate credentials. The access attempt had been traced back to the same computer network used by David Martinez's document forgery business. Vivian tried to steal more money this morning, probably to fund her legal defense or escape plan. But the account was flagged and frozen, and now we have real-time evidence of her attempting to commit additional fraud while under investigation. Linda smiled grimly. She just handed us ironclad proof that she's the real criminal, not Scarlett. But our victory celebration was interrupted by another phone call, this one for me. Ms. Walsh. This is Marcus Reed from Channel 7 News. I understand you've been in contact with my colleague about your family fraud story, but I've received some conflicting information that I'd like to discuss with you. My heart sank. Vivian had gotten to him. Mr. Reed, I'm actually at the police station right now providing evidence to investigators. Would it be possible to speak tomorrow? Actually, that's perfect timing. I'm here at the station as well, following up on some information I received about your case. Could we meet for a few minutes? Detective Chen nodded her approval, and minutes later, Marcus Reed joined us in the conference room. He was younger than I'd expected, with an earnest demeanor, and a recorder that he placed on the table with permission. Ms. Walsh, I'll be direct with you. I received a call this afternoon from someone claiming to be your sister, suggesting that you've been fabricating evidence and manipulating your family members as part of an elaborate revenge scheme against her. I felt my stomach drop, but Marcus held up his hand. However, I've been investigating financial elder abuse cases for 3 years, and something about her story didn't sit right with me. Professional document forgery, multiple bank accounts, systematic manipulation over years. That's not the profile of someone acting out of jealousy or mental instability. That's organized fraud. He'd done his own investigation. I contacted the bank, directly spoke with your grandmother's doctor, and reached out to the document forgery business that was mentioned in the police reports. Everything corroborates your version of events, not your sister's. Marcus had become an unexpected ally. More importantly, when I asked your sister to provide documentation supporting her claims about your supposed theft and manipulation, she became evasive and eventually hung up on me. Innocent people don't respond that way to requests for evidence. Detective Chen shared some of our findings with Marcus, including the security footage from the document forgery business and the attempted account access from this morning. This is exactly the kind of story our consumer protection segment exists to tell, Marcus said. Complex family fraud that victims don't recognize until significant damage has been done. Would you be willing to go on record with your complete story? I looked around the room at Linda, Detective Chen, Jamie, and Marcus, a retired police detective, an active investigator, a reformed accomplice turned witness, and an investigative journalist. My alliance had grown stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. Yes, but I want to do it comprehensively. I want other families to understand how sophisticated these schemes can be, and I want potential victims to know what warning signs to look for. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. We can film tomorrow afternoon after the police have made their arrests. That way you can speak freely about the entire case without compromising the investigation. Arrests. The word hung in the air with satisfying weight. How confident are we that charges will be filed? I asked Detective Chen. Based on what we have now, multiple felony counts for Vivian and conspiracy charges for her accomplices. The evidence is overwhelming, and her attempt to access the bank account this morning while under investigation shows a pattern of ongoing criminal behavior. Linda closed her laptop with satisfaction. Sometimes the best thing you can do for criminals is give them enough rope to hang themselves. Your sister's arrogance and desperation made her sloppy. Tomorrow would bring justice, but tonight I finally felt like I could breathe again. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I woke up in my own apartment for the first time in months without immediately checking social media or worrying about what new attack Vivian might have launched overnight. Detective Chen called at 8 a.m. sharp. We arrested Vivian at 6 this morning at her apartment along with Robert Kim and David Martinez. She's being charged with elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and attempting to obstruct justice by fabricating evidence against you. The relief was overwhelming. She tried to destroy evidence when she realized we were at her door, Detective Chen continued. She was literally shredding documents and trying to wipe her computer when we executed the warrant. That just added destruction of evidence to her charges. By noon, the story had exploded across local news. Marcus Reed's segment aired as breaking news featuring my complete interview alongside Detective Chen, explaining the scope of the investigation. The professional document forgery business was revealed as part of a larger federal investigation into organized fraud schemes targeting elderly victims. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from Grandma Rose. "Honey, I just saw the news," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "I'm so proud of you for fighting for the truth, and I'm so sorry I doubted you." Rose had been devastated when she learned the full extent of Vivian's manipulation, but she'd also been relieved to finally understand what had been happening to her finances and why she'd felt so confused about family dynamics. "I've asked Tom to help me set up a new will," she continued. "One that reflects what I actually want, not what someone convinced me I should want. And I'm putting you in charge of my medical and financial decisions going forward if you're willing." I was willing. The financial recovery was significant, but not complete. The $60,000 stolen from Rose's trust fund was recovered through asset seizure. Vivian's apartment car and designer belongings were liquidated to repay her victims. My parents recovered most of their stolen retirement funds, though the legal fees and investigation costs meant they'd never recover everything. More importantly, the family relationships began to heal. "We failed you," Dad said during one of our weekly dinners that had become a new tradition. "We chose to believe the comfortable lie instead of investigating the difficult truth." Mom had been seeing a therapist to understand how she'd been manipulated so completely. The therapist explained that this is called flying monkeys. She told me, when a manipulator convinces other people to attack their victim on their behalf. Vivian turned us into her flying monkeys without us realizing it. Understanding the psychology behind what had happened helped all of us process the betrayal and begin rebuilding trust. But perhaps the most unexpected blessing was the community that grew from the crisis. Aunt Linda decided to stay in town permanently, saying she'd missed being close to family and wanted to help other fraud victims through volunteer work. Jamie became a close friend, bonded by our shared experience of surviving Vivian's manipulation. Marcus Reed and I stayed in touch, and he introduced me to other journalists who helped me launch a blog about financial elder abuse prevention. Tom, our family accountant, began offering free fraud prevention seminars for elderly clients after seeing how easily Rose had been manipulated despite being intelligent and careful with her finances. "This experience taught me that anyone can be a victim," Tom said during one of our planning meetings for the educational seminars. Financial predators often target the people who trust family members most completely. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded through the district attorney's office. It was from Vivian, written from the county jail where she was awaiting sentencing. The letter was everything I expected, denying responsibility, claiming she'd been misunderstood, insisting that she'd only been trying to help the family manage complex financial situations. She blamed everyone else, Robert Kim for leading her astray, David Martinez for taking advantage of her desperation, even our parents for putting too much pressure on her to be successful. There was no apology to Rose for stealing from an elderly woman who trusted her. No acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused our family. No recognition that her actions were criminal rather than simply misguided. I threw the letter away without finishing it. Some people never accept responsibility for their choices, and Vivian was one of them. The sentencing hearing was held on a rainy Thursday in March. Vivian received 4 years in federal prison plus restitution requirements that would follow her for decades. Robert Kim received 3 years for conspiracy and fraud. David Martinez's sentence was part of a larger case involving hundreds of victims. I chose not to attend the hearing. I'd said everything I needed to say during my victim impact statement, which was read aloud in court. Instead, I spent that day with Rose, helping her plant new flowers in the garden that had always been her sanctuary. "You know what I've learned from all this?" Rose said as we worked together in the rich spring soil. "Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when things get difficult, who tells you the truth even when it's hard to hear, and who fights for what's right even when it costs them something." She was right. My chosen family now included Aunt Linda, who'd dropped everything to help seek justice; Jamie, who'd risked her own safety to expose the truth; Marcus, who'd used his platform to protect other potential victims; Detective Chen and Tom, who'd gone above and beyond their professional obligations to ensure accountability. Even my parents had earned their way back into my trust through consistent actions and genuine accountability for their role in enabling Vivian's abuse. The social media post that started this nightmare was still online, but now it existed in a different context. People shared it as an example of how victims of family abuse are often blamed and isolated by the very people who should protect them. My response post with all the evidence that exposed the truth had been shared over 200,000 times and helped other families recognize similar patterns of financial abuse. Today, I run a nonprofit organization that provides resources for families dealing with financial elder abuse. We've helped recover over $3 million in stolen assets and assisted hundreds of families in recognizing and stopping ongoing fraud. The work is meaningful, but the real victory is simpler than that. I wake up every morning knowing that the people in my life are there by choice, not obligation. I'm surrounded by individuals who value truth, integrity, and mutual support. My family is smaller now, but it's genuine. Vivian taught me that blood relations can be the most dangerous predators because they have access to our trust, our resources, and our vulnerabilities in ways that strangers never could. But she also taught me that justice is possible, that truth has power, and that chosen family can be stronger than biological family when it's built on authentic love and respect. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace in your family and standing up for what's right? Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us become the ones we need protection from. And it takes incredible courage to speak that truth out loud. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on family loyalty versus personal justice. I read every single one, and your stories help other people feel less alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not crazy for questioning family dynamics that don't feel right. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because I share stories about overcoming family manipulation and finding your chosen family every week. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, you deserve relationships built on honesty, respect, and genuine care. Sometimes the family we choose loves us better than the family we were born into. And that's not just okay, it's beautiful. Stay strong. Trust your instincts and never let anyone convince you that family loyalty requires accepting abuse.